Welcome to Tampa Home Talk with your host, native Tampa real estate girl, Katrina Madewell, a full-time, passionate, out-of-the-box thinker, love for home ownership kind of realtor with over 21 years of combined mortgage and real estate experience. Tune in every week at this time for expert advice on everything you need to know about home ownership, finance, maintaining great credit, building wealth, and making your everyday life better, and how you can be financially successful today and tomorrow. Remember, love where you live or let Katrina fix it. Now, here's your host of Tampa Home Talk, Katrina Madewell.
Good afternoon. This is Katrina Madewell, your host of Tampa Home Talk, and you're listening to us on the Real Estate Radio Network. You can find us here every Thursday and Saturday at 5 p.m., 1340, 1350, and 1400. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We have a treat in store for you. This week's show, we have special guest, native Tampanian like me, longtime Florida resident, always lived here, him and his family, and friend of mine since grade school. So really, really happy to do a show with him today. Happy to have a tour of his company. And so my guest today is going to be Joey Redner with Cigar City Brewing. Welcome to the show, Joey.
Thanks for having me, Katrina.
So we go back pretty far. We went to school, I know for sure at Adams, but I don't even know where maybe before that.
Let's see, I went to Young.
Okay, so So we went to all those beautiful Tampa schools. We both have kids, so we were talking about that earlier. But really excited to highlight Cigar City Brewing just because, Joey's a native from here, and it was just great to see all the different types of beers. I got to do a tour. I learned probably more in the first 10 minutes about beer than I ever did before. But talk about the different types, and I know that you guys don't always keep the same stuff. So start with your regulars. Like, what are your regulars you sell all the time, and then we'll go into seasonal.
So in industry parlance, the beers that we are producing regularly, we call our core beers. So our number one seller is High Lie, which is an IPA, and we're constantly brewing High Lie. And then after the High Lie, you have the Florida Cracker, which we're actually enjoying right now, and that's a Belgian-style white or wheat ale. We do the Invasion Pale Ale, the Maduro Brown Ale, the Hotter Than Helles, which is a Munich-style Helles lager, and it's a play on the word, the German word for pale is Helles, and we think it's a great beer to drink when it's hotter than Helles.
We're in Florida after all.
And then we do, beyond that, we do a variety of beers, that are seasonal. We do a pumpkin beer, obviously. So seasonally we do a pumpkin beer, we do a Scotch ale, a Russian Imperial Stout.
Hey, before we hop into all your seasonal beers, let's back up a little bit and just talk about some of your core beers, right? Do I have that right?
Yeah.
So I know that the craft beers are really sort of the highlight now of a lot of stuff. More and more people are drinking craft beers than ever. So maybe they drank liquor before, maybe they drank wine, but it seems like more and more people are tasting and testing the craft brews. So for people that don't know anything about what goes into these beers, can you talk a little bit about each one? So talk about your High Life, for example, which is your best seller. What do you compare that to? What does it taste like? What could someone expect? Like, what's that made of?
Okay. So, with most of the styles that are being brewed, so IPA stands for India Pale Ale, and it's actually a reference not to India, but to England. During the time of England's colonization of India, they've always had a wet military, and what that meant was they would literally give beer rations to their navy and to their military. So they were trying to get beer to thirsty troops in India and merchants. And if you're familiar with a globe, to get from England, you have to sail all the way around the Horn of Africa and then back up the African coast into India. So it's a long voyage, about 6 months by sea, and spoilage was a problem. It's a long way to go. So what they learned was if they brewed a higher alcohol beer and they put a lot of hops in it, that it could survive that sea journey. So you would get British merchants and military would then come back to England, once they were done with their tour of duty, they would come back to England and they would want that sort of stronger, hoppier beer, and they would ask for that India Pale Ale, the beer that they were getting in India. So that's really where the style grew out of.
So I'm curious, did you remember that from history class, or did you have to re-research that since the beer world?
Yeah, it's something that I discovered with beer. I think with all history, it's better learned if you have a good motivation. And for me, the motivation was beer. But there is a lot of history that goes into beer. Because of the nature of brewing, you would have styles would sort of grow up regionally and historically. I mean, a lot of times you'd have styles. Say in Scotland, they tend to do much maltier, less hoppy beers, and it was because the taxes on hops were so high. And then in Belgium, they use a lot of candy sugars and things to sort of as an adjunct to increase the alcohol. And again, it was a tax-related thing.
That's so interesting that the taste of the beer relates to the circumstance or the environment that the beer comes from.
Yeah, very much so. And, beer is probably one of the most diverse, of the alcoholic beverages. Obviously there's wine, there's spirits, and there's beer. There's north of 70 unique styles of beer. So I like to say to people, when people tell me they don't like beer, it's usually that they just don't like the styles of beer that they've had access to, because every flavor of beer is mirrored in food. So if you like to eat, you like beer, you just haven't found the beer yet.
And if you put a Bud Light in front of me, I probably wouldn't drink it, but if you give me something funky, I'll take it.
A nice light American lager can be very refreshing on a hot day, if you're mowing the lawn or something. But if you want a little bit more flavor, which I tend to want when I'm having a beer, there's, like I said, there's 70 other styles of beer out there that have something to offer to you.
So the High Light, it has more hops in it.
Right, and it's a little higher in alcohol, whereas your typical American beer, which really the style of American beer is defined by pale lager, so which is the largest macro breweries universally tend to brew. Those beers are anywhere from 5 to 5.5% alcohol. IPAs go north of 6%. Ours is 7.5% alcohol. So it's kind of a beer and a half. Mm-hmm. A lot of flavor, malt balanced with the hops. So you're going to get a lot of citrus, bitterness, kind of grapefruit rind.
And the hops were the most expensive part of the beer?
They definitely are the most expensive part. Pound for pound, the 95% of beer is water, and so that's relatively inexpensive in the grand scheme of things. If you get a 12-ounce beer, it's 95% water. Hops are the smallest portion, per weight, but they do cost the most. But they also, everything works together. Water obviously can add to the flavor profile, as can malt, and the yeast is going to give flavor components as well. But hops tend to be, especially in hoppier beers, tend to be the largest flavor contributor.
So if you had to compare High Life to another beer maybe that's been around for a long time that somebody might be familiar with, what would you compare that to?
The interesting thing is IPA, as it's understood today, is really kind of an American recreation. It was a British style that pretty much died out historically and was really embraced and reimagined in the U.S. So
is this because of the hops?
Because of the hops, and also just the aggressive, heavy-handed way that American brewers took to that style. They really wanted to infuse a lot of hop flavor. So as the beer has come to be known, as that style IPA has come to be known, the only real comparisons are to other American breweries. Sierra Nevada has a very famous pale ale. Obviously, ours is a lot higher in IBUs. IBUs are international bittering units, and it's a way to measure bitterness in beer.
Oh, that's interesting. So can you find that on the can?
Not many. Some breweries do include it, but it's one of those, it's like that hyper beer geek type information that most people don't even know what an IBU is, and so for a lot of people it's just a waste of printer ink to include what an IBU is. But pale ales tend to be in about the 45 IBU range, whereas IPAs are getting 65 and north. But hop flavor can be tricky. It's not necessarily all bitterness. You can get a lot, for example, in High Life, we really try to get a lot of tropical fruit flavor into our beer, which we kind of want it to have a Florida soul. And so we get that citrus note, but we want it to kind of go tropical too, which to us is reflective of the environment.
What's in it that gives it that flavor?
We use a wide variety of hops. There's 6 different hops that go into making it. There's Cascade, Simcoe, Autumn. We use a variety of hops, and the blending of those hops is what gives us the flavor profile that we get.
Gotcha. And that makes sense. I'm really glad. So what I have to ask, and it's kind of off topic, but you could have named your brewery anything, right? You could have named it Redner Enterprises. You could have named it Joey Redner. You could have named it Chamberlain if you wanted to. What made you pick Cigar City Brewing?
I've what's kind of always enamored me about breweries is that, especially smaller craft breweries, is they tend to be reflective of the areas that they're from. And I'm from Tampa. I'm a 5th generation Floridian, so that was important to me. And I wanted to have a sense of place. And Cigar City is a nickname that's never really been exported, to the rest of the country very well. And I thought it was a nice opportunity to have a sense of place, but also kind of educate people beyond the area about some of our history. And obviously the cigar history it really is the reason that Tampa became a city.
We have a ton of history here. I don't think a lot of people even realize how much history Tampa has.
And it's a really unique history that in many ways mirrored the general American story of the melting pot. We had immigrants that came here for jobs, and you had, Sicilians working next to Spaniards and Cubans and Swiss and German immigrants. I mean, you look at the Cuban sandwich, it's ham, and it's got the Sicilian influence with the salami, and then you've got the Swiss cheese. I mean, it really is that melting pot smorgasbord
and of course,
creation.
Some of them even put pork, right, which is marinated.
Right, and the pork, right, with marinated mojo, right.
Stick around. We have to take a quick break. Back in a minute.
You've heard this before. Interest rates are at all-time record lows. But if your interest rate is 4% or above, you owe it to yourself to call Silverton Mortgage Specialist. Silverton is a direct lender, and the best part about this is that the entire loan process is handled in-house. From application to close, we do it all in the same building, which means that our loans close fast and our clients know what's going on every step of the way. Our contact info is located on TampaHometalk.com under Radio Show. What makes Silverton different? Products. We offer VA, FHA, USDA, and conventional loans pricing. Best rates with the lowest closing cost. Process everything in-house. It's handled right here and not outsourced to anyone that no one can reach. This way we can avoid surprises. Our people are simply the best, and we know you'll agree. What will closing Silverton Mortgage Specialist mean to you? A smooth process, real home loan value, and personal attention from real professionals. Silverton Mortgage Specialists are here to serve you. Visit TampaHometalk.com under Radio Show for all of our contact details. NMLS 109600 is an equal housing lender and Florida and Georgia residential mortgage licensee.
Aaron Davis here, owner of Hillsborough Title, serving all of Tampa Bay. Our service, strength, and knowledge make us different. From Polk County to the Gulf, Pasco to Manatee, Tampa Bay, we've got you covered. Visit us on the web at thebesttitle.com. That's thebesttitle.com.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for rejoining us here this afternoon on Tampa Home Talk. You can catch us here every Thursday and Saturday at 5 p.m. You're on 1340, 1350, and 1400.
So before we started, we actually decided to do a remote today. So we set up in your conference room, your boardroom.
Boardroom is getting a little fancy. Conference room.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So this is where we are hanging out now doing the show, but we actually did a whole tour of the show, of the brewery, before we even started the show. So it was interesting to me, just all the different types of beers, and of course I knew about seasonal beers, but I guess when you see it in action, it brings a whole new livelihood to the brewery. So I know we're talking about different beers, but let's talk about, you say your core beers, right? Or your everyday, regular bestsellers. You have 6 of those?
Yeah, we have 6 core beers, and then really 3 of those beers are the bulk of what we brew.
Gotcha. So how many, what is it called? The tubs that hold it, are the
Fermenters.
Distillery, is it?
Fermenters.
Okay. Yeah. Fermenters. How many of those do you have that are brewing most of the 3 beers that you sell?
Let's see. We probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 fermenters on site, and of those, 14 of them are our largest. They're 120 barrels. A barrel is 31 gallons. So if you ever see the big half barrel kegs, they're called half barrels because they're 15.5 gallons, and 2 of them equal a barrel. And so in brewing, we speak in barrels. So each one of those 120 barrel fermenters will hold 240 half barrel kegs worth of beer.
And so your 6 core beers that you have all the time, your number 1 seller is High Life.
High Life, yeah, High Life is about 50%, maybe even slightly over 50% of all the beer we brew is High Life.
Okay, and the other...
So odds are if you come here and we're brewing, you have a 50 chance that we're brewing High Life.
Alrighty. So the other ones you have are the Florida Cracker, which we had the delightful time to drink.
Florida Cracker and Invasion Pale Ale are kind of neck and neck for number 2.
So what's number 4?
Let's see. So Cracker and Invasion will be 2 and 3, and then 4 is Maduro Brown Ale.
That's the one Chris was asking me about.
Yeah, that's an English style oatmeal brown ale. And obviously, a nod to Tampa cigar history. The Maduro is a type of dark cigar wrapper.
And so the next one is?
After that, you're going to be somewhere between Tocobaga, which is a kind of a hoppy red ale, and the name is a nod to the pre-Columbian natives of the Tampa Bay area, the Tocobaga, and so this was before obviously European settlers and before even the Seminole showed. We had the Tocobaga here, and then Hotter Than Helles, and that's a pun on the German word for pale because it's a Munich style pale lager. Hotter Than Helles and Tocobaga are probably somewhere in there. Now Tocobaga we probably could sell a lot more of, but some of the hops we use in that are tricky to get. So it's sort of the growth is curtailed by lack of access to the raw ingredients.
Save it for our local Tampanians, right?
Yeah, we do kind of try to keep that beer sort of around the Tampa Bay area. It occasionally goes beyond that, but we do. The goal will definitely to kind of keep it a Florida-only beer, a treat for the natives.
So what do you think makes High Life your number 1 selling beer?
The craft beer drinker, they definitely want to, in general, and then obviously, everyone has their own favorites, but in general, the IPA style tends to be very strong among craft beer consumers. It's an intense, flavorful beer. If you like hops and you like that citrus bitterness and some of the tropical hop expression that we get out of it, it's just right up your alley. So I think, I like to think we make it well. It's a very balanced beer. We actually, I just got word it was just rated by Draft Magazine, which is one of the larger beer-focused magazines, just rated at a 97 out of 100. So that's pretty solid. I don't know why we didn't get those other 3 points.
We'll find out where they last if we make those up.
But yeah, it's a well-balanced beer. Our brewmaster Wayne Wombles, IPAs tend to be his favorite style, so there's a lot of love, and there's a decade of just sort of fine tuning and honing of that recipe that led to the creation of High Life. So it's a beer that we make because we love it, and we kind of hope that other people feel the same way. And fortunately, they have. So
was that the first one that you did, or no?
Actually, the first beer we ever brewed was Maduro.
Was it really?
Yeah, and Maduro was kind of from a flavor standpoint my baby. I tend to like maltier beers, and Wayne tends to be more of the hophead.
So it's a thicker, like a Guinness?
It's in the vein. Brown ale isn't quite as it's not quite as viscous as like a dry stout, which is the flavor that Guinness is. We do a dry stout. We do actually a lot of stouts, and we nationally we're really known for our stouts. But Maduro is kind of it's kind of a tweener. It's a little thicker than your average brown ale, but it falls short of a stout.
So I know we're trying to think, we're going to describe the beer. So the High Lie is hoppier.
Hoppier, and so when you say hops, it can mean a lot of things. It can have sort of a pine needle kind of a flavor. It can have grapefruit. It can have citrus. But now there's so many specialty hops. It can have mango, papaya. I've even had hops that can give you black licorice or blackberry flavors. But we're going for tropical notes, and we're going for grapefruit and citrus. So those are the flavor profiles that you're going to see expressed a lot in High Lie, and then that's balanced by a kind of a caramel malt, and caramel is just it denotes a level of roasting on the malt, and it kind of does give you a caramel flavor, and that's a nice base for.
I don't know, that mango beer sounds pretty good. You might have another one for you. So Florida Cracker, this is going to be.
So Florida Cracker is a classic Belgian style wit or wheat ale. Wit means white in I forgot the language there. In Flemish. So it's a wheat beer and traditionally brewed with coriander and curacao orange peel. It's become a fairly popular style. To me, I like it because it has a nice flavor intensity to it, yet it's still approachable. And it's got a good mouthfeel to it. I've always felt wheat beers they kind of almost go into the heftier range of like a brown ale or a stout, but still being refreshing and light. So I've always liked that about wheat beers. So again, classic style. Lots of larger breweries are doing Belgian style white ales. We're certainly not the only one doing the style, but we've named it Florida Cracker again. We try to, and it's in honor of the Cracker Cowboys, who really were some of the first settlers of the interior of Florida. I'm a fifth generation Floridian, so I'm very interested in Florida history.
So is your goal to name a lot of your beers and give them that Florida reference if you can?
We certainly do. I mean, that's the first thing we look at. I've always felt, one of the things I like about craft breweries is they tend to really reflect the culture that they're coming from, and so it's something that I was certainly very cognizant of that I wanted to do with Cigar City, as I wanted to have that sense of place and also educate people about, not just natives that maybe just didn't know about some of our history, but also people coming into the area. You've got this can and you have this opportunity to teach about something. So why not teach about the area that you live and work and play in?
And it has the state of Florida on it.
Yeah.
Cigar City Brewing. I'm looking at a 6-pack here, and just a neat little Florida Cracker font. It's neat. Like the colors even represent Florida. Wouldn't you say? It looks like, is that sand?
It does have a kind of a beach sand look to it.
I like
it.
So you could have named Cigar City Brewing anything. Like we talked about this. You could have named it Redner Enterprises. You could have named it Joey Redner. You could have named it, my dear Uncle Dog Sam. Whatever you wanted to name it. What made you pick Cigar City Brewing?
It goes back to that sense of place. Tampa has a very unique history, and I don't think it was always exported very well. Cigar City, obviously, being a native, it's a name I was familiar with. But having traveled around the country, it's not like people think of Chicago and the Windy City and New York and the Big Apple. People don't necessarily immediately associate Tampa with Cigar City, and I kind of thought that was a travesty. Having grown up here, knowing that really Tampa, was a sleepy little fishing village with 700 people before Vicente Ibor came and started the first cigar factory here, and it's what really kick-started the growth of the area. So, having that unique history to draw from, it just, I don't know, almost seemed it would have been a travesty for me to call it anything but Cigar City Brewing.
So your family goes back to, you said 5 generations, right? Yep. But that's you, your dad. Is your dad's dad?
Yeah, well, it's actually, so on my mother's side and my father's side, it's 100% that it's 5 generations on my mother's side, and
gotcha.
So they are the classic Florida Crackers. Grew up, in the actually where they live doesn't even exist anymore. It's the Limestone area, so it's just a little north of Arcadia, in DeSoto County, and the very first Coker is my mom's maiden name. The very first one showed up in the early 1800s. I had several relatives that fought in the Civil War. on the side of the South. But yeah, 5 generations going back. Let's see, there was my mother Lorelei, and then Leon was hers, and her father, and then there was Maynard, Isham, and then Daniel.
You can tell you're going back with those names.
Yeah.
Okay, so going back to what you have, the Invasion Pale Ale. Invasion Pale Ale. Where did that come from, that name?
So Invasion is a reference to a parade that we have in Tampa.
Gasparilla Invasion.
Yes. And
But Gasparilla is not what it was when we were kids, is it?
No, yeah, it's definitely a lot bigger now.
There was one parade when we were kids. Now there's like 5.
Yep. Yeah, and you have to book your seats months in advance. It's definitely growing, but so is the city. I mean, the population. Even going back into the '80s when we were in junior high school, it's just massively larger. And I drive out to the areas where as a kid was just all wooded, and now those are kind of becoming older neighborhoods now. The Fawn Ridges and New Carrollwood,
Old Carrollwood, and like North Point. Those were like the places when we grew up.
Right.
Like everybody wanted to live there. And now it's they're older sections of Tampa, which is hard to believe. So Maduro Brown Ale, that's one of your favorites, and it was your first.
Yeah, Maduro. I do drink a lot of Invasion. It's got a nice hop expression, but being a little lower in alcohol, I can have 2 or 3 and still be somewhat coherent.
What percentage is that one?
It's about it's in between 5 and 5.5% range, so a bit less than High Life, but you still get a lot of hop flavor out of it. And
so this was a tribute to the cigar industry?
Yeah, so the Maduro wrapper is, it's obviously a dark wrapper, which, befits the beer style. It's a brown ale, and it's a very flavorful wrapper. In the cigar industry, there's a lot of parallels, I think, just the handcrafted nature of cigars and how using different blends of tobacco or different types of wrapper can give you different expressions. There's really... You can go beyond this, but there's 4 basic elements in beer, and that's water, barley, hops, and yeast. And different blends of those flavors and different types of ingredients give you different outputs. And I see a lot of those parallels in the cigar industry and how using a certain type of wrapper with a certain type of tobacco can give you a different smoke.
Interesting analogy. So the next one is going to be your Tobaga? Tocabaga. Oh, I knew I was going to mess that one up.
Not a problem.
That's a red beer?
It's a hoppy red ale, we like to call it. It's kind of a style bender. It's a bit of IPA, bit higher gravity red ale. The Tocabaga were the pre-Columbian inhabitants of Tampa Bay, so obviously before the Europeans and even before the Seminole came into Florida, before they split off from the creek. The Tocabaga were the people that lived in the Tampa Bay area. They created shell mounds, which are still with us today if you get out towards Safety Harbor in that area. But it just really a reference to again, that's a part of our history that I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with. That that even before the Seminole, there were people that lived in Florida and called it home long before Europeans stepped foot here.
I don't think a lot of people realize that either, just because it's like the melting pot anyway. Tampa is. People are always from somewhere else.
Yeah,
it's very rare that I meet somebody, especially even in my industry, that they're from here.
Yeah, I don't. I haven't met a lot of other fifth-generation Floridians.
For sure. And so, is your newest one hotter than Helles?
Hotter than Helles. So Helles is a take on the German word for pale. We like to feel it's a good beer to drink when it's hotter than Helles. It's not one of the
summertime beer.
Yeah. We brew it year round because it's pretty much summer year-round in Florida, but it's not one of our newer ones. We've been making it for a long time, and since we've been gone to our set core lineup that we have now, it's been in the lineup. It is one that I'd say that it's kind of trending up, and I'd say of the beers that we brew, it's probably stylistically the one that your average beer drinker is going to find most common ground with. The Munich style Helles Lager is very similar to what I call the American Pale Lager stylistically, and that is the type of beer that is most common in the U.S. So ours is unfiltered, so it's a bit heftier than what most people are used to, but it's definitely in that vein.
So people that would drink your traditional American domestic beers would like that beer.
Yeah.
You've been around for 5 years now? Is that the brewery?
Yeah, we'll be 6 years, March of 2015.
So how did you get started? Because I lost touch with you. I haven't seen you in a long time. And I'm sure you have, done this before in the news, but I don't watch TV.
When I first turned 21, it was the early 90s, certainly I'd had a few beers prior to turning 21.
I can't imagine that to be true.
But never. When I first had a beer, I didn't see what all the fuss was about. I didn't. The beer that I had access to, again, which is that that mass-produced American Pale Lager, it just stylistically didn't do much for me. So I was always willing to try something new because it couldn't get worse, in my opinion. And it just kind of made me, anytime I saw a new beer, I would try a new beer. And then finally, I had some beers that stylistically I enjoyed, brown ales, stouts. And once you know something exists, you'll really put in the effort to hunt it down. Now, if you don't know it exists, you just assume that's the way it is, and you let well enough alone. But once I knew there were styles of beer out there that I enjoyed, I put a lot of effort into tracking them down, found out that they were extremely difficult to get on a regular basis. And then, I started developing, I can get that beer here, and became loyal to some of those. And then I found out you could make it, and you didn't have to hunt so hard. So that really kind of segmented in my mind, not just that I could make it for myself, but if I was searching for it, that probably some other people were as well. And I think that was probably when I first realized, you could get good at making it, and you could make it for your home area. Because even then, most of the beer that I could find that was stylistically something that I enjoyed was coming from far away. And, time is generally the enemy of beer. There's many beers that actually age quite beautifully the way that a wine would, but by and large, 95% of the styles of beer, age is their enemy. So
is that because it has to travel and temperature changes and all of that type of stuff?
Yeah, well, the main ingredient, especially in a hoppy beer, hops, that's the first thing to start to degrade in a beer. Light is the enemy of beer, and you can never, without a can, and we do can all of our beers, you can never 100% take light out of the equation. So hops, they're very active to light. They'll start to break down pretty quickly. But yeah, heat can be an element, and just the very nature of a lot of the small breweries is the packaging equipment isn't quite as robust as some of the larger breweries. So oxygen pickup is going to be more ready, and the cheaper the equipment, the less capable it's going to be. So anytime that a beer is packaged maybe suboptimally compared to what the big guys do, and then sent hundreds or even thousands of miles, you're just fighting time at that point. So you can hope for the best, but a beer that had to travel 3 months to get to you is not going to be as good as a beer that was packaged 2 days ago.
That makes sense. So did you start doing this at home?
I did.
Was that an experiment?
Yeah, I got really into just...
I could see that with you, a lot of those guys that we went to school with, I could totally see that.
I got really into, just finding good beer and just exploring new styles. And then, I've always been a history buff, so when I started learning some of the regional history of some of the styles, it hit me on that level as well. And then just the idea that thousands of years of brewing history could just be recreated right in your kitchen. That obviously was appealing as well. So yeah, I got into home brewing and just really became what I like to call a beer geek.
So how complex was that when you started doing it? What was your trial and errors when you're doing this at home?
You can brew. You can take a couple of pots and pans from your kitchen and you can brew beer. It's not necessarily going to be the best beer in the world, but you can brew beer, and you can brew decent beer. And as you get more involved and you start at the home level, being able to have some temperature control, fermenting a little bit cooler, having more robust equipment so that you can all grain brew and control the mash temperature a little bit more accurately. You can really create. Some of the best beer I've ever had in my life was homebrewed beer. Some of the worst beer I've ever had in my life was homebrewed beer.
Of course.
So it can cover a pretty wide spectrum.
So going back to the spark, like how did you do Kickstarter? Is that where you got your start?
No, I had worked in the beer industry for a long time just because I became so enamored with it. So I really just wanted to be involved with it. So I've been writing a beer column for the TBT for a while, and I started working for another local brewery called Dunedin Brewery out of Dunedin, and was doing sales for them and working for a beer importer. So I really got to watch the market pretty closely, and was convinced that plus just in traveling and going to other cities, most city size of Tampa at the time that I opened the brewery in 2009 had 5 or 6 breweries. Especially when you talk about Tampa as a tourist destination, you look at Clearwater and St. Pete and how many tourists that we get, and especially tourists that were coming from much more beer savvy areas, the Philadelphia's and New York and Boston. Those are pretty mature craft beer markets. So it just really stood out to me, and I, having worked in the industry, I just knew that there was demand there, and I think even being probably the biggest cheerleader there was for craft beer demand in Florida, I really still underestimated what the demand was.
So what would you say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to start a brewery?
As I started with a 15-barrel system, so again, 15 barrels is 31 gallons. I can brew about 30 kegs, full-size keg, and that's pretty good size. We've kind of grown in segments. We were fortunate that I started in a space that was on a property that my father owned and had sat vacant for the entire time that he had the property, and we were kind of looking to go, with a name like Cigar City, a lot of people think that we're in Ybor City, but we're actually in West Tampa, very near the Buccaneer Stadium.
Close enough.
But we actually did look at Ybor City, and at the time it made a lot of sense. It was a little closer to kind of a little more population density, or at least at the time, and it made sense with the name. But I just didn't see it as being very robust if we did grow. Which fortunately we made the decision that we did. So I put it here just because I figured you can get a few bigger trucks in and out of here more easily. We've since grown, and we started with about 6,000 square foot in a complex that was about 32,000, and we're in the whole thing now. We actually run 2 breweries. We run the original brewery, which is a 15-barrel system, and we built another brewery and packaging hall, which is down at the end of our complex, and we operate both.
And so you started with how many people? How many employees? Because there's all kinds of people running around here.
I started with 1 employee.
Yeah.
And then my brewmaster came on maybe 3 months into it, and then it was really just me and him for the better part of a year. And then I think shortly after we actually started brewing beer, we hired our first full-time assistant.
So how did you know each other before you worked together?
I did. I'd actually met him before. He's from Alabama, Enterprise, just over the border from Florida, and his first brewing job was actually at a brewery in Tallahassee called Buckhead. And I had met him. He was brewing at a brewery in North Carolina before he came here, and I had actually met him up there, but at the time didn't know. And really through interviewing I'd interviewed several other people, and one of the people that I interviewed ended up took a job somewhere else, but recommended him based on some of the things that I had said that I wanted to focus on, and it just really turned out to be the right fit. Wayne had he had over a decade of hands-on brewing experience, which I didn't. I was a home brewer, and brewing production level is it's a whole different ball of wax. It's the difference between cooking a nice meal for your family and cooking a banquet for 300 people.
Yeah.
And even really more complicated than that, because tank management and just the level of complexity of you've got to be a scientist, you got to be a janitor, you got to be an engineer, you got to be a general contractor. There's just a lot that goes into not just running a brewery, but starting a brewery from scratch.
Absolutely. It's interesting how much a lot of those other things, make up what you're talking about. Like, for example, we did a show on mold a while back, and the guy has a total scientific chemist, medical background, but it's so relevant once you know what mold is. So it's just interesting, not to mix the two subjects, but it's interesting that you say you have to be a chemist and
really you're 90% janitor. Keeping things clean is the main thing, and
not just clean but sanitized, because really what you're doing is you're extracting sugars from barley and making what's called wort, and you're making the perfect food for billions of different microorganisms, and out of all those out there, you only want one specific one to show up to the dinner table. So you're making this perfect banquet for a huge range of things that are going to give off flavors, and you want to just keep one thing in there, and that's yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. That's the only thing you want in there. And so that's a bit of a challenge when you've laid out such a tantalizing spread. And you really do have to have just very high lab quality type cleanliness. And as you ratchet up production, it becomes more and more important. And then you're just really drilling down and trying to not just have the quality there, but the consistency. People want to have the same drinking experience each time they have your beer.
Well, consistency is important. I mean, that's why people like you and I eat out of the same restaurant that we're familiar with, because we expect things to be the same way, right? That's why chains are successful.
Well, people want variety, but they want variety of different styles. They don't want to have a variety each time. Each time they have High Life, they don't want to have variety in High Life.
That's right.
They want High Life to be High Life every time, and then when they want variety, they'll switch to a different
It needs
brand.
to be by choice, right?
Right,
Not
exactly.
forced.
They want variety on purpose, not by accident.
So out of almost 6 years, what would you have done differently if you had to start all over, reset the clock? I mean, everybody, including myself, can think of a million things I'd do different.
Yeah, that's one of those things where it's like, you kind of have to touch the stove to know it's hot. So it's, if I could go back again and not make that same mistake, sure, there's things I would change, but then you wouldn't get that learning experience. You really need to do things wrong to understand why they're wrong.
You pay for your education, right? One way or another.
If you don't feel the pain, you don't learn. That's all. It's how I look at it. So I know it sounds, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change anything because the things that we did wrong were valuable lessons, and they taught me because I felt the pain. If you touch the stove and it's not hot, then you didn't learn not to touch the hot stove.
So like what? What was one thing that was painful in hindsight, but you would never take it back?
Just some of the way that we grew, where we grew too fast and didn't manage quality control as well as we should have at many times, because you can't take back a negative experience, and there was times where we brewed the beer perfectly, but we didn't package it perfectly, and so you didn't have the experience that the customer wanted, and you pay anything to take away a negative experience. You literally can't go back and take away a negative experience that a customer potentially could have. So those are things that if I could still learn, I would go back and fix. Then too, some of the things where I tried to always kind of grow in a very sustainable way. I'm very debt averse, so I tried to grow with cash flow. And
which is how most smart businesses should do it.
Right, and it works to a degree, but in many ways, you almost can't grow properly without going into a little bit of, I even feel weird saying this, but smart debt. I don't, it's hard for me to say smart debt, but strategic debt.
Right.
We cash flowed pretty much everything for, I'd say, almost 3 years before we ever borrowed money. But in many ways, it hindered our growth because we just couldn't afford to buy fermenters, but also buy all the new lab equipment we needed and hire you couldn't do all those things at the same time. And
I saw some of your equipment. I mean, the smaller stuff to the newer stuff was huge. Big
but
difference.
in retrospect, having that drag to prevent you to grow, again, it probably allows you to learn lessons more slowly, which maybe they retain better. So, again, I don't know what I would do over again because I don't know what I would fail to learn if I'd gone back and did it right the first time.
So what does your day consist of? Like when you wake up, what does it consist of for you? What do you do?
Well, I have 4 small kids between the ages of 16 months and 6 years. So mornings are, usually pretty active, getting them.
You're doing the kid shovel for the first 3 hours.
Getting
right?
them in the same direction to go. My wife blessedly handles most of that, but I usually get to do the fun stuff like kissing them goodbye for the day and goofing around. What I love about this industry, what appeals to me the most is that you never really have the same day. And there's so many.
I can relate to that one.
There's so many moving parts, and there's so many different aspects. We're light manufacturing, and we're producing a product, and things can go wrong. Equipment can break, challenges, and we're always kind of constantly expansion. So you're also doing marketing. You're creating brands and putting new products out. You're also doing public relations, and you're interacting with customers. We have a tasting room on site, so you're interacting directly with the end consumer,
which is amazing, by the way. So you could talk about the tasting room, because when you walk in, it's this little bar and then another whole little area with more beers. And so that's open 7 days a week.
7 days a week, yeah.
And later on the weekends.
We're open 11 a.m. till midnight Sunday through Thursday, and then till 1 a.m. on Friday and Saturday. And then we normally run tours Wednesday through Sunday, but we're undergoing some construction in the original brewery to build out a larger event space, which we really don't have now. We have to turn down a lot of company outing type events because we can't accommodate them. So to give us our own training space, we're pushing 60 employees now. So when we're doing training, we can kind of get everybody in a room. And so we'll have that, and we'll also be able to accommodate larger events and private functions, which we haven't been able to do in the past. So because of that, tours have been suspended. We're hoping
till you get settled, right?
Till we get it up and running, we're hoping to start them up again in October, November.
So is this still fun for you?
It is, because again, like I said, it's always something new. It certainly has its challenges, and some days are worse than others, but in general, I don't feel like I'm caught in any sort of a grind. It is fun for me still, and at the end of the day, we make beer.
Right. So get a whole lot more fun than that.
Yeah.
So I know it's not what you thought you were going to do, obviously, growing out, going back to high school.
It doesn't surprise me.
What did you think you were going to do? Did you know you didn't know?
I threw a lot of keg parties in high school.
Should have got that.
Yeah, I have no way to prove it, but I know this. There are 3 Chamberlain grads that own breweries, and I highly suspect that Chamberlain might be, Tampa's Chamberlain might be leading in percentage of alumni that own breweries. Bob, who owns St. Somewhere Brewing in Tarpon Springs, he's a Chamberlain grad. And then I have another buddy, Scott, who has a brewery in Barcelona. Oh
my gosh.
And there's something about Chamberlain. We produce brewery owners.
I know, right? From the smokestack into the Chief's Head to the beer. So what's next for you guys? What do you have coming up that's big? I mean, obviously you have your expansion going on.
We're
What's your vision? Where would you want to be 5 years from now, I guess is a better question.
Yeah, well, from a brewery standpoint, I've never really dictated to the market how big we're going to be. We've always sort of realized that we were shorting demand and tried to grow into that.
But if you're like me, you have to, I sit back and I say, okay, I'm going to serve 60 families this year. That's my goal. We're going to help 60 families buy and or sell a property, and that's our goal for the year. Right. So what's yours going forward, or So,
I kind of always try to take it back to the beer. Mm-hmm. Our goal is to get better and more consistent, to continually make better beer, to continually make the beer that we already make more consistent. And then if we grow, we'll be growing because people are asking us to make more beer, because it's, the pull through is faster, or the number of outlets are greater than it used to be. We've never, we're very backwards, I guess, in some ways, in that, we really do brew beer that we love, and then we sort of figure out how to market and where to market it after that. And we've always kind of grown to the demand that was there. We didn't go out and say, okay, well, we think because IPAs are this share that we can go out and brew this many barrels of IPAs. It's always been very much, we put it out there, it gets an account, it gains traction, which causes it to get new accounts, and then demand increases, and so we try to figure out how to make more beer. And that's my goal, is to brew to the demand, not to try to dictate to the market what that demand should be. And I feel like
that's a fantastic goal to have.
Focus on the beer. It
says you're not cramming anything down anybody's throat. You're asking people that enjoy craft beers, hey, what do you want? What do you like? like? What can we do better or make more of? That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and there's always limitations. There's beers that we'd love to be able to make more of, but raw ingredients or just the time process in the tank. Some beers take longer than others. Our fastest beer we can turn in 10 days. We have some beers that take almost 2 months to make.
Which is which? What's your
Maduro, Cracker? Those beers tend to be 10-day beers. Jai Alai can be up to a 21-day beer, which obviously is much longer, and that's our flagship beer, so that takes up a lot of tank time. The Munich Helles Lager, while it's not one of our higher selling beers volume-wise, it's a 4 to 5 week beer. It's a lager, and lagers take longer in the tank. But we feel like it's important to have that portfolio, the variety, and so we like to keep a nice lineup of beers. Not that necessarily you would, but if you were having a party, we like to think that if you have the full range of Cigar City beers, you can
appease everybody. I love it.
We've got the wheat beer, we've got the dark beer, the hoppy beer, the pale ale, the lager.
So your seasonal beers, how many do you have right now?
We do probably 8 set seasonal beers, but we reserve some of our fermentation capacity to whims. We just literally don't assign it, so that if someone has an idea like, oh, we should make this and use that, so we're not like, oh, well, we can't brew that until 2 years from now because it's already plotted out. We literally leave some of our fermentation space open. So we do just a lot of last minute idea beers during the course of the year that were not planned in, where we planned for the year in the last quarter of the previous year. So we'll start planning for 2015 in the last quarter of 2014, but we literally just leave some of it open so that if we have an idea that we never thought, we didn't know was coming, we still can brew it and not have to wait.
So where a lot of those ideas come from the general public, from feedback, from Twitter, Facebook people?
A lot of them are brewery generated. Again, we have close to 60 employees, and one of the things we've really benefited from is, being one of the first Florida breweries to kind of become a little bit bigger. We're still relatively small in the grand scheme of things, but by Florida standards, we're a fairly large craft brewery. In fact, I think we might be the largest in Florida now. But we've benefited from being able to really draw in and hire the really passionate beer geeks, people like me that really love beer and just really geek out about it and have a lot of amazing ideas, but really had no opportunity to go work in the industry and find an outlet for those ideas. So as we've grown, we've been able to benefit from those people saying, and we give people access to our brew house. If people have a good idea, we will totally let them brew it and get it out there. And
that's smart. It makes sense. So what does Dad think about you being a beer geek?
It's funny because he didn't drink beer for like 25, 30 years, and really in the last year, he'll say he'll have like one beer a day. He'll sit down and drink a beer, but I think he's 74 now, and I think he's lived his life, and he's done all of the things that a man does to his life, have kids and a business, and I think he's probably going to outlive everyone I know. So I'm not going to say he's in his twilight years, but I think it's very satisfying and gratifying for him to be able to be here every day and watch this happen. Yeah. And he really loves the employees that we've been able to attract. He's attracted to people that are passionate about things, and it's one of his favorite things is just go around the brewery and just see how dedicated people are and how passionate they are about what they do every day.
Those are the people, though, that bring life to what they do. It's just like us, and for what I do in my industry, our motto is love where you live or we'll fix it. And you have to have that passion for anything you do, because if you don't, you're just getting up and it's a job.
Well, if you don't, it's work.
It's a job.
Yeah. Nobody wants to work all the time.
Nope. So I have had so much fun here doing the show with you and just learning about Cigar City Brewing and really catching up, because it's been forever. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
I'll post all of your social feeds on our website at tampahometalk.com. You can also catch up with us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Tampa Home Talk. But for now, this week, we are out.